As you work to build a resilient plan of record that you can have confidence in, one of the risks that you're going to have to manage is going to be long term care risk, the potential of having a healthcare expense shock sometime in the future. One exercise in evaluating that risk is to estimate the cost of that future risk in today's dollars. Now, I recommend that you use this as a supplement to the long term care decision pod, which is our standard operating procedure for thinking through management of this risk in an organized way so you can get to a judgment call that you're confident in. So, what are some reasons we might want to do an estimate in today's dollars of this future risk? Well, one reason might be just to understand the severity in dollar terms of that risk today. Number two is perhaps you're looking at purchasing long term care insurance and you're trying to get an idea of how much benefit you should pay for to supplement you funding this potential risk. Or perhaps you would prefer to self fund this risk, or you don't qualify for long term care. So you're going to have to manage this risk and take on the potential cost of this risk if it were to arise. Probably a good idea to have an understanding of how much that amount is. Perhaps you're thinking of funding a contingency fund today, or a sinking fund, or an envelope, some people would call it, to put money aside specifically for that risk. Those are some reasons you want to get an estimate of what that cost might be today. So, how do we go about doing this? Well, step one is going to choose your assumptions. What are the number of years of care you think you need to solve for? What is the date that that care is going to start? What type of care do you want to pre-fund or do you prefer to have? And then what's the inflation rate on that care? Obviously, it will have a cost today that we can get an estimate for, but you're going to have inflation that you're going to have to manage. What's the future cost of that? So those are some assumptions, and we're going to go through an example here. Once you have those assumptions dialed in, then you want to estimate the cost, the future cost of the care that you would prefer. We're going to go through these steps and then choose a discount rate, which is essentially the rate of return on monies you were to put aside today between now and when that care might start. And then calculate the net present value of the future cost of this risk to get an idea of what the amount would be today if you were to pre-fund that. So let's go through an example of each one of these steps. So step one, we need to make some decisions here. And this is hard. I'll use myself as an example. I'm 57 years old today. And let's assume I'm thinking about managing long-term care risk. Well, I don't know when I might need this risk. I don't know if I'm even going to need this risk, but I got to make a decision. I got to make a decision of, well, how many years of long-term care might I need if this risk were to present itself in the future? I'm going to say 3 years. I'm going to need 3 years of care as the number that I'm going to choose as my assumption. And I'm going to assume that this will start when I'm age 85 and last for 3 years. What type of care do I want? Because there's different levels of care and each one costs differently. We'll look at an example of that. I'm going to say I want a nursing home private room. I'm going to fund the most expensive option. And then I'm going to assume that whatever the cost is today, that it's going to increase by 4% per year just due to inflation. Now, if I were to choose funding 5 years of care in the future, obviously that's going to be a bigger sinking fund or present value of that cost today if this were to happen. And then if it was going to be sooner, well, then that would probably increase the potential cost. But I could also choose a shared room or assisted living in some other form, or I could change my inflation rate. You can see where all the variables are. You're going to have to make a decision today. Now, this is a two-way decision. You can change this next year when you do this calculation, but you're going to have to make a decision in order to forecast out to the future. So that's step one. I've made my assumptions. Now I need to know, well, what would the cost of care be for Roger when he's 85? Well, luckily, Genworth creates a calculator that they update every year. And we have a link to that in our decision pod, but I note it down below where I can say, well, I live in Mansfield, Texas. So assuming I'm going to be here when I'm 85, I'll use the Manfield, Texas numbers based off of the survey. And I'll be 85 in 28 years. And I'm going to use a 4% inflation rate. You can do this directly on the website. It will tell me the cost in today's dollars and in future dollars for different levels of care. So we have in-home care, community assisted living, and nursing home facility. I chose the private room, and it has footnotes to where it got these numbers. So current day, if it were to happen today, if I had a private room in a nursing home facility, their estimate is $86,140 per year. And with a 4% inflation, they say in the future, when I'm 85 in this case, it would be $258,308. So now I have an estimate of what the future cost would be for the care based on my assumptions at age 85. So we got step 1 done, and we got step 2 done because we've estimated what it would be in future dollars. So now that we have the estimate of the future dollars for the private room in this long-term care scenario, we need to take steps 3, 4, and 5, which, if you recall, were to choose a discount rate. We'll talk about what that is. Calculate the net present value for each year's future cost, and then sum those up to determine how much to pre-fund our contingency fund for long-term care. So let's go back down to here, and we're going to go do this. Now, calculating long-term care can be a little complicated for some. So there are YouTube videos on calculating it. There are formulas embedded in Microsoft Excel and Apple Numbers. I'm using Apple Numbers here. But let's walk through the steps just so you understand the process, and then you can explore that on your own. So first thing is, I have number of years of care. I have 3 different years. I'll be 57, and I'm leaving all of this the same because I want to fund the total future cost at the beginning of my 85th year. And so that means that that's 28 years from today. So that's 28 periods that I am solving for in order to bring the money back. We know the cost of the private room in today's dollars. We've calculated the we've determined the inflation rate and calculated the future cost of each dollar. And what I did here is I used the Genworth calculator and just simply added inflation onto this number to get an understanding of the future cost for all 3 years of care. So we can see that's just over $800,000. This is an intimidating number of the potential cost in the future dollars of a long-term care event at age 85 for 3 years. That's a big number. If I wanted to self-fund that, after I've picked myself up off the floor, I'm going to have to, I can't do that. But one thing that we forget, and this is steps 4 and 5, is if I were to fund this number today, in order to have this number when I'm 85, I have 28 years for that money to work for me in some way. And we'll assume that you're investing it in some way. And so we actually need to bring this number down to today's dollars to account for the fact that this money should grow over these 28 years. And that is what the net present value calculation is for. Now, I'm using a simplified version when we come to inflation adjustment, just for example purposes. But let's take this first number, $258,308 that would cost me in year 1 when I'm age 85. We've inflated that number, so we know that's a future dollar number. If I were to put money in an envelope today and invest it, or a contingency fund, how much do I need to put in? Well, that all depends on the growth rate that you're going to receive between now and when I'm 85, or 28 years here. So that is what the discount rate helps solve for. This is your assumed rate of return on monies you put in today that will grow, in this example, over 28 years. So if I were to use a net present value calculation, which I did here, which is something that's embedded in Apple Numbers and Microsoft Excel, if I were to put in $38,850 into an investment today, and that investment grew at 7%, it would grow to $258,308 $308 when I was age 85 over that 28-year period. If I received a 6% growth rate or discount rate, I would have to put in $50,533 in order to grow. And if I were to put in, or if I were to only earn 5% per year, I'd have to put in $65,853 in order for it to grow to that first year liability. That is essentially what a net present value calculation is. So I did that for all 3 years of my assumed need for care. And so I'm going to have to determine what my discount or rate of return will be for my assumption. So let's assume that I picked this one. Let's assume that I picked that I'm going to earn 6% per year as my estimate. If that's the case, I would need to fill my contingency fund today in the amount of $157,743 in order for it to potentially grow at a 6% rate of return to meet the future value of all of this spending when I'm age 85. So now I've determined how much I would need to fund this contingency fund and what my true exposure to this is today, accounting for inflation and also accounting on the fact that this money will grow. Now, this is very inexact science because we don't know what the growth rate is going to be. We don't know the inflation rate on the cost of care. We don't know when I'm actually going to need care and for how many years I'm going to need care. But in order to determine the potential severity of this risk, we're going to have to make those assumptions today to get an idea of how to manage that. Now, as your life continues and you are more informed on your health and your situation, and your current assets, you would continually redo this to assess what the severity of this might be. But it's a very helpful exercise in order to determine the potential severity, how much you might want to transfer to insurance, and if you were to fund a contingency fund, how much you would need to put that in there today.